welcome to today's edition of Liberty Action Network TV. I'm your host, Doreen Finkel, and today we are going to be talking about the case of Amanda Winkowski. It is a mystery of epic proportions. If we recall, going back to 2009, her body was found frozen, turned upside down in a garbage tote inside a Buffalo. Today, joining us on the show is her attorney, Matt Albert. Welcome to the show, Matt.
Thank you for having me.
Matt, can you give us a little bit of background about the case so far?
Sure. Well, I've only been representing the estate of Amanda's for several months, but obviously this case predates that by a lot. She went missing late in 2008, suddenly disappeared from work, actually. She was called, left in a frantic manner, and she essentially disappeared. Last person she was seen with was Adam Patterson. A search took place over the course of next month and a few days, and ultimately her body was discovered in a garbage tote in Buffalo's east side, which in one of its worst neighborhoods, in a position which she could have not possibly positioned herself, upside down. And the search was on, and the investigation was going forward towards who murdered Amanda. She had all sorts of signs of trauma, neck contusions, things to that effect, and of course she was naked with her hair chopped off in a tote. However, things got even more bizarre about a couple months later, when the medical examiner's office and the DA's office announced that Amanda's death was a drug overdose, despite the fact that the levels of drugs in her system were somewhat minute in nature, certainly not anything that could have prompted a drug overdose, and that was their findings. So from there, her family took it upon themselves, knowing that the truth was not what was being put out by the authorities, to launch their own thorough investigation through a series of lawsuits and things to that effect. They were able to conduct their own autopsy, which demonstrated that Amanda was murdered. That's been confirmed by numerous experts. There's been an abundance, a plethora of evidence as to who her murderers were, and yet for some godforsaken reason, law enforcement digs their heels in and says, there is nothing we could do about it, there is nothing we could do about it. They've somewhat relinquished their original position of an overdose to saying, well, we don't know how she died, and the whole thing is bizarre. There's all sorts of political implications, maybe some racial implications, all sorts of implications to show that the top layers of government have been intent upon not solving what took place with Amanda Winkowski, as opposed to actually finding the facts as to what did take place with Amanda Winkowski. That's the story. A 6-year saga of conspiracy, a 6-year saga of pain and torment for the family, condensed into a nutshell.
So we have the 6 years that have gone by.
5.5 years.
5.5 years that have gone by.
Right.
And we have this girl, her body was found turned upside down in the garbage tote there. Nothing upon the investigation. It's sort of like the investigation hasn't...
It's funny you say that, because what we did, because I've assembled an investigative team along with myself to figure out what did happen with her. Obviously, what would benefit us greatly and immensely is if we just obtained photographs, in terms of the original evidence. Obviously, I wasn't there, neither were my investigators. So we would like the original photographs that took place at the crime scene. We would like the police reports to know who was interviewed. We would like those statements. So we've submitted FOIL requests, merely to say, okay, you guys aren't calling this one a murder. We want to look at it ourselves, which we're entitled to do, which the mother of a slain daughter is more than entitled to do. Please turn over to us those documents. And instead, I get a letter just yesterday saying this is an ongoing active investigation with the Buffalo police detective. Therefore, we cannot turn over these documents because it could impede an ongoing investigation. Frankly, I know this isn't, I'm not going to say this word on air, but it is absolute horse manure. You know, it's not true. It's the fact of the matter. I mean, if this department was truly investigating what was really going on, and this is as far as they got to this point, I mean, a bunch of kindergartners could have done a lot better.
Okay, so you said you spoke to the Buffalo Police Department. Is there anybody in particular?
Well, the letter that I received saying we're not giving you anything because it would impede an ongoing investigation was sent from Captain Antonio. He's the guy that handles their freedom of information requests and things to that effect. So as soon as I get it, I call him up and I say, well, Captain, you know, we've actually developed some evidence of our own, which we have, and those are specifics I can't get into. But I said, please give me the name of the Buffalo police detective so we could turn over this evidence to him so that we could get this thing solved. Wouldn't that, if a detective was on a case and he heard it and he received notice that somebody had highly relevant evidentiary information, wouldn't you think that the detective would get back to them ASAP? Yeah. But has he got back to me? No. Again, it's a fraud, it's a sham, it's a disgrace. I can't put a strong enough adjective or noun behind what's took place over the course of these 6 years. They're covering up a murder. It's as simple as that.
So when they say it's an ongoing investigation, does that almost mean that they don't want to give information out?
Yeah, well, they want to cover it up. I mean, keep in mind, this was deemed by the medical examiner's office, and on Amanda's death certificate, it says accidental overdose. You're telling me that Buffalo Homicide is spending 6 years investigating an accidental overdose? Does that make sense? You don't have to be, I mean, I've been in law enforcement and everything, but guess what? Homicide, they investigate homicides, not accidental overdoses. They're not investigating anything. So, yeah, I mean, it's simply put, they're covering up a murder. It's as simple as that. Why they're doing it, how they're doing it, we have a lot of information to that end as well. But, you know, that's not necessarily everything I'm going to disclose right now. It's going to come out. It will come out.
So then it seems to be that they just want to conceal everything and make it harder and harder for you guys to get information. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, they don't want this thing getting solved, right?
So let's talk about the police for a minute. What are their thoughts on this from the beginning? Have they always thought it's a homicide, or have they thought it was something else,
well,
the death by accidental overdose?
I mean, you talk about the police, and I mean, the thing is, you've got your detectives that were originally examining the case who thought and still think that it was a homicide, okay? And then you have your people in the political positions, your commissioners and things like that, that they know, everyone knows it's a homicide. I've had high-ranking police officials say it's a homicide, which makes it even more, you know, that much more mystifying why they continue to say, well, we don't know. Maybe it's an overdose. We can't solve this thing. We can't prosecute it. We can't do this. We can't do that. I mean, all you've heard from the very beginning on this case is we can't. When the truth's out there, it's right out there, ready to be found. It's on the streets. I mean, we've made breakthroughs on this case where this is a case that, as a former prosecutor, I could say that right now, with a minimal budget, with the short amount of time I've been on this case, you know, we've got this thing not completely solved, but we certainly have more than enough compelling and convincing evidence to bring charges against someone right now if we had that authority.
Right. So now, are the police actually told by anyone to keep quiet?
Yes.
And who might that come from?
Well, Buffalo police as a whole are under a gag order. None of them could speak. It's like 1940 Berlin. None of them could speak aside from Mike DeGeorge, who, I don't know, I'm sure you could compare him to a character or a figure that existed back in 1940 Berlin. But he's the only one that talks, and he basically, you know, puts out, you know, false misrepresentations, politically convenient lies, and everything else, and that's his job, basically, and he gets paid very well to do it.
So what could happen to an officer should they speak?
Oh, they get disciplined, fined, they... You know, and that's the thing, these officers, they should be speaking. I mean, I'm not totally letting them off the hook. Many of them, and some of them directly. I mean, I could put names out there that eventually I will, but right now I won't. You know, but officers that absolutely have, you know, have reached out to Leslie and said, your daughter was murdered. exhumed the body. There's a reason Leslie exhumed Amanda and, did a second autopsy and everything else, because an officer told her your daughter was murdered.
Right.
And that officer also told her that somebody came into the autopsy room, he didn't say who, prior to the autopsy being conducted, and told everyone to leave and said, this is an accident, everyone get the heck out of here. I know who that person is. It was Frank Sedita, the DA here in Erie County, and that's confirmed as well. So that's a name I will drop. But I mean, is that the way that a DA conducts a homicide investigation, to call it an accident prior to an autopsy by a pathologist being done? The answer is no. I've never seen. Truth is stranger than fiction, and this is way stranger than any kind of fiction that I would have heard.
So had they ruled it death by undetermined, then the police could continue to investigate, correct?
No, not, well, they could, but I mean, then they'd still come up with, well, if we can't prove the cause of death, then we could never prove somebody guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of a homicide. So now the DA's office has switched it from overdose to undetermined, and they think they're being cute and they think they're being smart because they still have their built-in excuse as to why they can't prosecute this thing.
Right. So now I want to take a step back a little bit, okay?
Sure.
The day, for example, her mom, I guess they discovered her missing. Okay, the police had gone to Anton Gardner's house, correct? Okay, so what happened after that? Was a report filed?
Very good questions. These are the documents that the police are hanging on to under lock and key. And yes, there were reports filed. Absolutely. There's probably about, 50, 60, 100 police reports relating to this incident. But they're not turning any of them over because it's an ongoing investigation.
Okay, so there's nothing in the law that says the police have to turn them over.
Oh, there is, and we're going to
there
sue them
is.
to get it. Absolutely. It hasn't been done yet. It should have been done by prior attorneys.
So
They didn't do it the
so
right
the
way.
police are holding on to her records for that reason. They're not
Well,
just
yeah, I mean,
disclosing
whether you want to
the,
call it her records or that's, technically they're reports and evidence, but yes, they're not disclosing them.
Okay, so now let's just talk a little bit about the DNA. Okay. In the first coroner report, they had found that Anton Gardner's DNA was on her. Okay.
Right.
But now there was discrepancies. Okay, and the other reports that came out had said they also mentioned Adam Patterson.
Right.
Okay, so
Well, go ahead.
okay, so then wouldn't that put Adam Patterson as a person of interest?
Well, he's a person of interest, and he
Right.
always has been. So, yes, is the short answer to that. But, I mean, when you're talking about DNA, I think the fact that you really want to hone in on is that Miss Brill, along with her ex-husband, Mr. Fink, had been told for about a year, prior to the judge giving the order to allow Miss Winkowski's body to be exhumed. The medical examiner's office, and this is clear fraud, and again, that's what the nicest word you could call it.
Right.
They had told Miss Brill that there was no DNA. And then, once her body was exhumed, all of a sudden the story gets leaked from the Buffalo Police Department that there were 6 specimens of DNA found upon and inside of Amanda.
So there could have been 6 persons of interest then.
Yeah, well, there are, yes. I mean, absolutely, yes.
And
for sure.
the police-
Two known samples and 4 unknown samples. Known samples being Antoine Garner, unknown being, and Adam Patterson, and then 4 being unknown
So
samples.
wouldn't
Yeah,
that
you'd want to know
place-
who those samples. Yeah, you'd want to know who you could attribute that DNA to, but the police don't.
Right, so wouldn't that place Amanda then the night of the incident in perhaps maybe multiple people committed to it?
Yeah, well, keep
Right.
in mind we don't have an exact, time of death or date of murder or anything else because her body was found frozen upside down in a garbage tote. But yeah, it certainly shows she was in very, very close proximity to 6 people preceding her death. And yeah, of course it shows that.
So now also with the coroner report, were there some pages missing?
Whose report are we referring to?
The second one.
The
Se-
second.
yeah.
The second
Okay.
one was done by Dr. Comparini, who was
Yes.
the family pathologist. There's nothing missing in that report. That was a very comprehensive report. we're talking about the first report by Diane Vertes, basically I've had high-ranking police detectives tell me that it's basically the most half-baked autopsy report they've seen. And you would think that in a case that's been in the news, with this sort of publicity, that obviously the Erie County Medical Examiner's Office would have done one of their better works for a case of this magnitude. And yet, I mean, it was written, by the quality of a first-year medical student, in terms of, a first-year medical student that's going to flunk out of med school. So again, it makes you wonder why. That was by design. It's not incompetence. You could attribute things to incompetence only up to a certain point, but everything that's gone on, it's willful incompetence, which is otherwise known as fraud.
Right. So now, but might there be something missing from, you call it incompetence, okay? Maybe that initial coroner's report, okay?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of things missing. The DNA.
They have stated that the first coroner report said that she died of a drug overdose.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So.
Yeah, there's no toxicology report. They didn't report upon the DNA. They withheld the fact that there was trauma and contusions to her neck. They completely concealed the fact that there were contusions, upon her vaginal region. So it's kind of more tip of the iceberg, but yes, there was tons of things missing, and that's what I'm saying.
So
it's one of the worst reports I've ever seen.
Could the perpetrators have drug-induced her in some way, or given her drugs
there was
in some way?
GHB in her system, as it turns out, when the toxicology report was released. So yes, absolutely.
Okay, so then if there was that in her system, then I guess the analogy is, why would the coroner come out and say it was death by drug overdose? Why would they not look further? That's the whole point on that.
Right. Well, GHB, my understanding is that other drugs that go in your system, such as maybe codeine and things like that, could rarely, in rare occasions, break down into GHB. So, I guess in some parallel universe, they could have attributed the fact that there was GHB in her system to, the fact that another drug broke down. I think it's morphine, actually, that breaks down into GHB. So, I'm sorry, the question exactly was, say the question one more time. I apologize.
Okay, well, the coroner had said that it was death by drug overdose.
Right.
But I'm saying if it was induced.
Right. Well, none of the drugs, there were drugs in her system. There's no question. We're not hiding from truth here. Mm-hmm. Amanda used drugs. She was, on again, off again, clean. Okay. Mm-hmm. She was, what she was doing at the moment, whether it was voluntary or involuntary, I don't know. But the levels of drugs in her system, and that's what's important, were not that high. And they certainly were not that high for someone that has a drug history, to cause some sort of overdose. Far from it. So, when you're talking about drugs in her system, yeah, people that use drugs, there's drugs in their system. Whether they were involuntarily or voluntarily ingested, we don't know, but certainly There is enough proof to show that she was murdered.
Right, and in which the second coroner's report came out and said it was death by strangulation. And
well, not just that. We have multiple medical professionals. We have ear, nose, and throat specialists that, viewed Amanda's, her neck region and the pressure that was exerted upon her neck and everything else. And it's a clear case of strangulation by a clear case strangler, Antoine Garner. So, I think that's the last person that, she was dropped off with that admitted to having intercourse with her after numerous inconsistent statements. And this guy's he's raped and choked out, a slew of women, some or one or two, of which he is finally now in jail for. So, again, when I call him a strangler and a rapist, it's not me saying it. It's, a certificate of conviction that states that, yes, in fact, that is who he is. That is what he does. It's his MO. He's been doing it since he was a juvenile.
And that's another thing I want to ask you. Since he had a history even prior to Amanda, I don't know the law, but from me on the outside, why wasn't he taken off the street then?
Well, prior and subsequent, because he's raped women subsequent to him getting away with Amanda's murder. And if I'm going to throw something out there that hasn't been unveiled before, we have someone, who swears to the facts, who's attested to the fact that Garner, while in custody, while in custody, I'll leave it at that, stated clearly, they trying to throw the books at me because I got away with that other one, that murder that white girl found in the garbage can. Antoine said it. So he said that they're going after him on these subsequent charges because he, quote, unquote, got away with the murder of that white girl found in that garbage can. Antoine's confessed. I mean, this case, believe me, I can't repaint everything that happened that night because they're not turning over the evidence. If I got it, I'd be able to solve this thing in a couple weeks. But I mean, I do know enough to know that I've got enough on Antoine Garner right now where if I were a prosecutor and I were to prosecute him for his crimes, I'd get him convicted. There's not a doubt in my mind. I've prosecuted cases, way thinner than this. And keep in mind, they're holding all the evidence. I'm just talking about what I've been able to uncover.
Has the race issue infiltrated this case and distorted?
I don't know, in the sense that I don't know what, if you're talking about the reason for the cover-up, why are they covering this up? Does race factor into it? Tough to say. I do know that Byron Brown is the mayor of this town and he's black. I do know that he's very, very close friends with a Maurice Garner. Maurice Garner is his mentor. Maurice Garner is why Byron Brown is in the position he's in. Okay, and Maurice Garner is a relative of Antoine Garner. So if you're asking, does race factor? Is it race? Is it nepotism? Is it? I don't have all the answers, but yeah, maybe, just maybe, it hits too close to home at the mayor's office, and that's why they want this thing covered up.
Well, right. The reason why I mention that is because there is a type of race called Black liberation theology, which I kind of don't want to get into, but they don't see others as real people. So he may not have seen her as a real person.
Right. And I mean, yes, hearing him talk, but at the same time, he's also dehumanized black women in this manner. He's in prison right now for raping a black woman. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I mean, I can't give you too much more than that. I can't get in his head. But I mean, he is inhuman. I could tell you that much in the way that he, what he does to women.
Right. So now, where does the case go from here?
Well, basically, we are. I mean, the good thing is, as painful as this is, there's no statute of limitations on murder. So, long story short, we keep doing what we're doing, and we're building evidence, and we're building. It's essentially like playing a game of dominoes, and we keep stacking them dominoes, and they're all gonna fall sooner rather than later, and then the truth's gonna come out. And once the truth comes out, then we do what we have to do.
But he can't be retried criminally, correct?
Well, yeah, he could, because he was never tried.
Oh, that's
he was
right.
Never
he was
charged.
never tried. Okay, so you can try him again criminally, but how about civilly, if we're looking at this case? Because you have some issues with people in the town, maybe in the police department, not disclosing,
right.
Mishandlings there.
Well, we have to uncover the truth, and then we can pursue the correct civil claims against those responsible for covering up Amanda's murder. But, it's it's more than a two-step process, but just to boil it down to its simplest forms, before we could pursue those civil claims against those parties liable for this fraud, this sham, we have to uncover the truth. And we're going to do that. We will.
Right. And I also want to ask you, because you've worked with the family. Mm-hmm. How has the family been through this?
Well, I got in, keep in mind, I only have been working with the family, specifically Leslie, for the past few months. But, I mean, at the same time, we've developed a close relationship, a close attorney-client relationship and everything. But, I mean, it's, words wouldn't do justice towards what the family's been through. I'll just say one word, hell, and more or less leave it at that.
Right. So, going forth, okay. Again, it's 6 years, 5.5 years going by, and
Mm-hmm.
and you're saying you're continuing the investigation along the way. Where do you see this case in maybe about 2 years?
Oh, done, solved,
Done,
done and
solved.
solved. Oh, everything's gonna be out by then. If not, I'm not. Yeah, if not, we're gonna keep working at it because you don't give up on something like this, no matter how much. And this is where Leslie's come from, and from that sense, it's somewhat inspirational. But when you truly, see an injustice that needs to be righted, you don't give up on it, no matter how many times you run into a wall or hit a roadblock. So do I see it
For
as being done
her.
in 2 years based on the progression so far since I've been on this thing? Yeah, I see it being done. But if not, we're gonna keep working until it is.
Right, but for her, it's been 5.5 so far. And just one other thing, we didn't mention this. How has the media been?
Well, again, I haven't, since I've been involved in the case, the media hasn't been so much involved, given that it has been 5.5 years. But I think overall, from my review of the media articles and everything else, I'd say, well, definitely subpar. But they've definitely fallen into the trap where we're just going to run with whatever the government tells us is fact. But at the same time, they've somewhat done some features and spoken with Leslie. Some have been better than others.
But are they also controlled by whoever is pulling
The
the
factions
strings?
in place. Well, yes, I mean to a certain extent, but I think it's more to the point where they're so used, media as a whole, mainstream media as a whole, is so used to receiving those governmental press releases, spinning a few words around, getting a couple react quotes, and calling it an article. That I think, I think it's not necessarily collusion or corruption or anything like that. I think it's just they there isn't an investigative reporter that I know that would be able to crack this thing open. So I mean, I think it's much easier when you can't crack the case open to just spin them governmental press releases.
Right. So, okay. So we're actually out of time,
Me too.
and thanks, Matt Albert,
You're welcome.
attorney for Amanda Winkowski.
Sorry. Yeah, you're welcome. You're very welcome. Sorry, as you know, I had an urgent matter that, but yes, you're very welcome, and I'm glad I could be of assistance.
And folks, thank you for watching Liberty Action Network TV. I'm your host, Doreen Finkel. Until next time, have a good night.